Falta Susan. Falta Susan y ya.
Invitamos a todos los asistentes a ocupar sus lugares.
Ladies and gentlemen, be so kind and take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the private sector, diplomats, members of the civil society, and members of the American Society Council of the Americas, welcome to our event, Nearshoring, Encouraging Investment Opportunities in Mexico, brought to you by the Council of Americas and the Ministry of the Treasury. A special acknowledgement to our sponsors, without whom this conference would not be possible. The pan-regional sponsors, Citibanamex and JP Morgan. The corporate sponsors, Amazon Web Services, the Tavern Corporation, Octi Energy, Kellogg Company, Medtronic, MetLife. It is Investment Service, Use Mexico, Sempra Infrastructure, Procter & Gamble, Philip Morris International, Valero, and the coffee break sponsor, American Tower Corporation. In addition, we greet those who are joining us online from all over the world. We will tweet this event #MXCOA. And today's conversations could be seen in the American Council of the Americas will be hosting this event. Let us welcome Susan Segal, President and CEO of the American Council of the Americas, and Rogelio Ramírez, Minister of the Treasury and Public Credit. Let us start with this conference, and I give the floor to Susan Segal. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be back in Mexico City. We are on site here for our annual conference after 2 remote years. We salute all of you who are here, and we salute those of you joining us via Zoom and social media. Thank you very much for joining us today and for your participation. Today, we are here to talk about the nearshoring opportunities so we can encourage investment in Mexico, which is a key topic and a significant opportunity for Mexico. Before we get started with this conversation, I want to especially thank Secretary Rogelio Ramírez and his entire team of the Ministry of the Treasury for their collaboration on this conference, which has been significant. Thank you, Randy Nelson and my team, for making this event possible. Mr. Secretary, we're all here to talk about the National Growth Strategy and relocation of the global value chains, nearshoring. So let's start already with the questions. From the Treasury Department perspective, what incentives are you developing to open up the investment environment, and what are the regions and priority sectors for you? Thank you very much for having me. I want to thank Ms. Susan Segal, the Council of the Americas, the sponsors, the attendees. Thank you very much for the invitation. Our strategy to create an environment that draws investment is based on 3 key factors. First, to provide certainty on the macroeconomic framework. That is to say, to clearly set out the government goals, what we will do with the macroeconomic aggregates from the tax perspective, which is simply translated into reaching the following goal. Fiscal budgets should be subject to a certain metric that is consistent with the goal of public debt on the GDP. This has reached us to the level of a 50% debt over GDP, which is below the rest of the emerging countries, and it exceeds the advanced economies. The strategy's second pillar is to define a new frontier of potential production. What does this mean? A frontier means that we want to expand today's product frontier. We want to take it to another level. So we're expanding the frontier of the potential product. We're opening up to investment opportunities where no opportunities existed. And those opportunities were missing because major regional development projects were required, which were not developed throughout Mexico for several decades, but this strategy is being rekindled. Regional development projects in areas with low production levels, with extremely low productivity levels as well, And public investment will also draw in new investment, more employment, which will take us to the next level of productivity. That development is currently concentrated in the southeastern region of Mexico, but not only there. The third pillar involves the compliance with the USMC that was entered into in 2018. Main interest for us was to renew the treaty according to the needs detected by the U.S. government. As you all know, it was renegotiated, but in our mind, we never intended to let it go. This is why we're glad to have subscribed the treaty. These are the three pillars to open up to investment. Thank you very much. Having that in mind, what incentives or funding mechanisms are you contemplating to assist the business so the investment strategy can materialize? You know, how are you going to draw public and private investment? Because it's a large partnership. It's a strong partnership. I think this is a great question, and it's a wonderful opportunity we have to put what we have on the table. Remember that when President López Obrador entered in office, ruled reducing the income tax to 20% in the border cities and the VAT to 8% on top of a fuel price policy. That was designed in order to prevent any cost disadvantages for people living in the border cities, the northern border cities. And that's where his mindset became clear. You know, what do I need to create economic activity? Once that the regional development projects were designed for the Southeast, we are connecting railways. We had a certain existing infrastructure, but we still had to build some from scratch. We enhanced the ground transportation, the highways, and we knew that the need to invest was still there. On top of that, throughout the Tehuantepec Isthmus corridor, we also acquired 10 industrial parks with a great land extension for industrial storage facilities, for physical facilities and installations. That infrastructure will be added to. And this is just out of budget allocation, because this project is a staged project. It's a phased project, and it can only work through state budgeted allocations. The private investment would have taken too long. But the investment on industrial parks and the supporting infrastructure that includes optical fiber, pipelines, and port facilities, private investment will now consider that it is feasible to engage and to invest in Mexico. Yesterday, the president talked about Constellation Brands that is settling in Veracruz. And you can be certain that new service and product providers will locate themselves in that area. So the state has to place the physical infrastructure, and after that, the major projects will come. And when I say major projects, I'm talking about the different companies that are a hold of specific projects that also have specific needs. So we will try to answer positively within our legal framework and fiscal framework to the need of providing investment, of allocating investment. That's what we're going to do. Allow me, the president last night talked about the railways and the connection over the central and western part of the United States, but he also mentioned the east, because that involves infrastructure construction, right? Yes, indeed. The railway project is indeed centered at the southeast because this area is not physically connected. According to Mexico's economic history, or in history, we have seen that England was not able to, wouldn't have been able to have an industrial revolution without opening the canals. And we have the Yucatan Peninsula, which has been physically disconnected. The ideal connection that we have contemplated is through railways, because a railway line already existed. It connected both ports. But in addition to refurbishing the railway for cargo and passenger trains, but specifically devoted to cargo transportation, will be added on to another line that will run to the south of the Mayan Peninsula, which is the Mayan train. And both lines will be connected through Oaxaca, the southeast of Guatemala, to connect the Mayan train with the Tehuantepec Isthmus and eventually with Central America. Hence, these connections are, of course, onerous projects, and they require a long time of planning, a large amount of money, significant engineering, and the results will not be immediately seen. But we know that once the physical connectivity is there, we will incorporate two states of the country to a homogeneous activity level regarding the region, its natural resources, its capacity, and development mission at the mid and long term. So it is the best segue to our next question. What tools does the federal government have to fund the infrastructure? What should the role of multilateral organizations be to develop the ESP infrastructure? I believe that this is yet another opportunity for me to describe how financial resources are being deployed for these projects. And as I mentioned initially, the initial aspect of public investment involves allocated budget. Yesterday, over dinner, the list of projects was mentioned, and I was wondering if you were wondering, what are these guys, or how are these guys doing this? You know, what money are they using? Because the public budget, as we inherited, gave us lots of room to dig in deeper and to allocate resources for more productive objectives. So that was the first stage. And secondly, we're using development banks such as Banobras, Banco Mext, and NAFI. Third, we are also using resources from multilateral banks, which is a cheaper sovereign emission rather than commercial banking issuance, although we do have access to cheap financing that is devoted to the group of emerging countries. We will use the multilateral pathways more adamantly because it's a financial tool that has been fully available and we have not led it to full potential. So we will embrace it, and at the same time, We have to follow the green agenda, the climate change agenda, the gender equality agenda as well, that contemplates the goals to which we have added the social component. This means that our project will also add on to green funding and to social development funding. So we incorporated the social element to the language of the new green bond generation, because we have discovered all over the world that the social goals are fully compatible with the needs of society as of today. Finally, what do we need to develop the capital market? What are the benefits in advancing the agenda? Because perhaps it adds more liquidity to both domestic and external markets. Yes, we work closely with the Mexican financial sector. In a few hours, I have to attend a board meeting. And, we keep a tight relationship with them, with the business sector. The president of Mexico told them that the same operation rules would remain, except on those aspects that can be deregulated or where regulatory infrastructure costs can be reduced for financial entities. Our market is pretty robust. Nonetheless, it requires additional anchorage for its full development. And that additional anchorage is now carried out by reinforcing the legal framework so we can establish the role of guarantees, court facilitation, understanding of judges on the type of financial affairs, and we will have to work much harder. Not only on the judicial sector and legal framework, but in other regulatory affairs as well. We are very much concerned about the goal of deregulating and removing red tape on duplications or redundancy among entities, because they have to collect data, then they have to report it 5 or 6 times to different entities. So we want to remove that burden. We have to reduce it as far as possible. But at the same time, we need to be aware of the fact that the current situation of the financial markets in Mexico will eventually lead to cases of unregulated issuers that end up entering into a contract, but they don't honor their obligations. So we need to be cautious to that regard, but the core of our initiative aims at deregulating and reducing costs. And that's very important for market development. Sir, could you describe your strategy on emissions and your specific thoughts of the international markets this year? Our issuance goes as far as the public budget approved by Congress, leads us to financial balance, to be balanced in the market or to be balanced with whomever will do so. And that figure is 2.8% of the GDP, as I mentioned initially. And it is consistent with the fact that the debt as such should not exceed the 50% of the GDP. We know that if in the month of January, I'm contemplating the closing on December by 50%. By year's end, debt amortization will be in place, but generally speaking, we're very mindful, and we do not want to issue more than Congress has approved, which is a modest figure for Mexico, for the size of Mexico, and for the appetite of Mexican currency in the market. So it's a positive figure, as a matter of fact. It is highly acceptable. And we want the situation to remain so. We will be extra careful in this stage because we have seen that there's a racing creed of the increase of the Federal Reserve, increase in interest rates on loans, and a general landscape where you can tell that liquidity has become really tight. But you have been very, very careful, very conservative when it comes to the fiscal deficit. So congratulations, sir, on your handling of everything. And there's something else, because we are talking about the value chains and nearshoring, which involves significant investment in Mexico. In your opinion, it will not only draw U.S. companies' investment to bring their value chains to Mexico, but it will also attract companies from Japan or Singapore. They can bring their value chains to Mexico. Have you thought about it? Are you contemplating that? What can we do to draw more global interest to invest in Mexico? And that's exactly what we're trying to do in this conference. 60% of the membership are from the US, but the rest come from all over the world. So it is really important.
All of this is very important for us. We are an economy that exports almost 39% of its GDP. This is a large number for an economy so large. For a large economy, it's not normal for it to be so open. We have opened up our economy because in the 90s, we had to make adjustments in terms of internal demand that were quite significant due to fiscal deficits and several crises in the 80s and 90s. And so internal adjustments were being made, and we needed to get exports out to grow with those exports, meaning that we can not only make adjustments in terms of an excess internal demand with fiscal deficit without having an escape valve and producing more, because what are we going to adjust with if not with more production? So we opened the economy, and at the moment that we became so open, it meant that we had numerous industrial sectors that are open to trade from different parts of chains that are part of a global chain. These flows of products in industrial and manufacturing sectors existed already, regardless of our strategy development in terms of onshoring. They already exist. So the strategy consists in visualizing them, knowing that there's potential there, and therefore working on not only strengthening those flows that are already present, but also talking with the companies and providing them with security in terms of them knowing that this is a long-term investment that they can have. That is why the new USMCA gives us a great base, because it provides us with the certainty of access to market that is the greatest in the world. Today, for example, I'm going to deviate. I'm going to go off topic a little bit, but this is important. The United States reported in 1.4 drop of GDP in the first quarter, but it grew. Consumption grew by 2.7%, what you call PCE, 2.7 more. One would ask themselves, how is it possible if consumption is 60% of the product, GDP drops and consumption increases? It's all about imports. Imports and excess of exports reduces GDP. that we don't want to understand this, or we have been ignoring it, turning a blind eye on this for decades. And we haven't realized that when we have a lot of internal expenditure, we need to make sure that this expenditure has circularity within our economy. Because if we spend too much to incentivize consumption and consumption goes out and purchases in Asia, then there are sales in magazines and stores and restaurants are full, but there's no production. And that is something that we need to take into account. For that reason, supply chains, manufacturing supply chains that we're interested in bringing in with nearshoring are lines that are already being developed without our intervention, and our intervention is going to strengthen them. That's what happened with the automotive industry in the 80s. We already had a very strong flow of automotive products, but the free trade agreement came to solidify it. So, Mr. Secretary, I apologize. We have to wrap up our discussion. I would like to thank you for being here once again. Thank you for your support. And I would like to congratulate you for the Mexican economy, because you are leading along with the Mexican president in a formidable way. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and good luck, because we're talking about, we're in a situation where markets are very difficult and we need strong minds and hands to handle these economies, given all of the volatility that we're seeing in the markets nowadays. Thank you, and thank you. I'd like to thank Secretary Ramírez de la O and Susan Siegel for their intervention. To begin with our keynote speech, Opportunities for Investment in Mexico, we'd like to invite Tatiana Clouthier, Secretary of Economy, to the podium. Good morning. It's a pleasure to greet you all. Some of us met last night. To others, I'd like to say good morning. Part of what we were asked to talk about is nearshoring and investment in Mexico. First, I don't see Blanca Treviño, but Blanca said that nearshoring is one of the words that she has coined, and so let's borrow that for today. I'd like to say, and I think that some of the people who were present yesterday heard Mr. Rodriguez de la O in terms of the possibility of nearshoring, meaning what it could mean for Mexico if we did things right. It would entail over 500,000 jobs. In 2022, the company, in 2021, there were exports for several $1 billion towards the United States that generated 3 million jobs, while China exports near $500 billion to the United States. What we're seeing here is something that we were talking about yesterday as well, and in Veracruz. The president was saying that either we wake up and start consolidating this integration of the North American region, and the president was still talking with a long-term vision, an integration of the American continent, or we're going to be in trouble because we're going to have other countries, other economies growing and taking advantage of that situation. We must be clear on this, and Rogelio Ramírez de la O has already said that Mexico has great competitive advantages for this relocation of different companies. This is the thing that we have been talking about once and again, and we have to take advantage of these opportunities. It would be worthwhile to highlight some figures. Yesterday, non-oil related exports grew by 8.4% in March compared to last year. And the main manufacturing sector, the automotive sector, that I believe Secretary Rogelio was saying, is something that was consolidated in the past. And the question is if this is part of what is being presented and we're visualizing right now, and we're asking ourselves what would be the second part of what we would be strengthening when he talked about consolidating further regions. So what is the region what is what we want to start building to strengthen it in the future? The USMCA clearly has strengthened this integration that 30 years ago we had the vision of creating, and that the United States, Canada, and Mexico have been working on and building. We consolidated the automotive industry. There are other industries that have become stronger throughout the years, not necessarily in an isolated way in one specific country, but with all three in a comprehensive way. And that is why the high-level economic dialogue has been working on building and establishing strategic priorities and trade priorities to promote economic development, generation of employment, global competitiveness, which is one of the points in which we have to emphasize. And I'd like to go back to what I was saying at the beginning. We want to strengthen our region as a competitive region, or are we going to let other countries and other regions take our place because we didn't do what we had to do? Equality and poverty reduction in the region with an inclusive approach. So here, let's talk about job markets. It's quite clear that the increase in labor costs in China due to trade and commercial disputes in recent years and the growing concerns in terms of resiliency in supply chains has become something that we need to address to take a competitive advantage. And the question is, are we going to take this opportunity or not? I have talked with several members of industries around the country, especially in the industrial sector, and they're saying there are so many companies that are raising their hands to come to Mexico. So what can we do to set up on the other side what it corresponds to this situation? Rogelio was talking about infrastructure as a state or federal government, because infrastructure has to do with the opportunities that will be given or will have to be given so that these companies can come to our country, or a strengthening. When I talk about infrastructure, I speak about everything in general, plus one of the values that Mexico brings to the table so much, which is the human aspect, human capital. Not only what we have in front of us, which is youth, obviously not mine, but yesterday we were talking with the governor of Utah, and he was talking about numbers in terms of youth, and he was saying you still have the advantage there. We are at an average of 35, and you are at 20 years of age. So that is part of the high-level economic dialogue. How can we take advantage of that youth to better prepare it and to bridge the gap in the spaces where it's necessary in terms of use of technology and future and current development, given the fast development of technology? The labor market still doesn't offer great value, with an average cost in our country of $4.8 an hour compared to other countries. I'm going to stop right here for a moment, because usually, or at least when it comes to the USMCA, there's something that resonates. It sounds something like, in Mexico, they're not doing things as they should be doing them, or are they? In terms of our labor reform, I always like to highlight this point because it seems crucial. When we renegotiated the agreement, the concerns of all of our nations had to do with the payment, with paying our labor force. The president was saying last night that he is a very persistent man, so persistent that he was in campaign for 18 years with the goal of assuming the president, of taking over the presidency. And throughout these years, he spoke about the importance of labor rights. So this labor reform that was undertaken in Mexico to achieve union freedom is a task that has been in the process of being built in our country for years, and it's something that we seek in all three nations of the region. Better salaries, better wages, better opportunities for the families of our nations, and the accompaniment that can be undertaken based on the commitments made through the USMCA. These are commitments that we acquired because we believe in them and not necessarily because we need someone to surveil them. We need to accompany this process, to look this process over. We have talent, we have qualified workforce. We are among the 10 best trainers within OECD countries. We have an electronic system that has been consolidated based on cooperation among companies and academia. Then this has become crucial. We are talking about a triple helix where I think we're in the fourth one already. We need to take that into consideration. If we don't consolidate this liaising between academia and universities and the academic sector, it will be difficult to move forward at the pace required to comply with the profiles necessary for the industries and what they require. And here we have a co-design of different areas of study, innovation programs, talent training, etc. And I go back to the high-level economic dialogue. In that dialogue, we are working coordinatedly with the United States to strengthen training, and on Friday, we will be signing an agreement with different representatives from the country and CONALEP to be able to bridge this gap wherever it's necessary and like a la carte, as we said. What do we need for states to strengthen these capacities? And the government has provided a significant percentage. I don't want to make a mistake right now. I can't remember the numbers. In terms of Jóvenes Construyendo el Futuro, youth building the future, and scholarship support at the medium or high education level, and what we have been working on with different companies related to technology to move forward in terms of an updating and training for engineers and other similar fields. When it comes to logistics, I believe time is of the essence. Time plays a crucial role. Each minute passed is money gained or lost. And without a doubt, transit time, the shortest transit time between Mexico and other countries allows companies to have lower or reduced inventories of their products and reduce costs. Proximity, which we didn't do anything about it, we were just blessed by nature in terms of being right next to the United States to take advantage of that opportunity in terms of costs versus other countries. A truckload to Memphis costs money and 4 days, while costs 4,000 and something, while from China it costs 6,000 and something dollars and takes much longer. These are the great advantages that we have to take advantage of, we have to consider, and we just have to, they're up for grabs. Also, in terms of linguistic barriers, I think that we have an advantage. I've seen how before it used to be we wouldn't see very often people from the US speaking in Spanish, and now we see this quite often. I think I have yet to meet a current governor, and I say governor, I don't want to discriminate, that does not use Spanish to communicate. We also have growing infrastructure. Our Secretary for Treasury was talking about that. We have 36 additional projects to be undertaken, and we have been working with multilateral organizations, with the IDB and CAF. Here specifically, Dr. de la Mora has been working with them, who undertook a study for the South-Southeast in terms of specific projects, and that is where we have coordinated with state governments so that they can raise their hands, and instead of saying, I have all of these projects, they'll just say, what are the two that you want to develop this year to make them a reality? That's what we have been working on with governors from the South-Southeast Mexico region based on the studies undertaken. We also have 16 maritime centers that offer access to the Pacific Ocean. And yesterday, the president was also stating this, the great advantage that the transismic project represents to be able to have access to other areas and regions. In terms of foreign direct investment, I must say that Mexico has been one of the few Latin American countries that did not see a significant drop in FDI during the pandemic. The income that income was reduced by less than 10%, while in other countries it went up to 37%. We must consider that we need to take advantage of the different niches that are present in our country. As our Secretary of Treasury was saying, we are looking to extend our borders. And what are we referring to with that? More or less 30 years ago, the Bajío area was consolidated in terms of infrastructure. The federal government back then built all of the highways and speedways to foster connectivity, and development began. That is a replica of what we seek to consolidate now. And like I said, it's not something that can be done from one day to the next, but we begin with the strategy for the South-Southeast region of our country. Here, since 2019, we have detected that we have the possibility of over $34 billion in terms of investment to make this a reality up to 2024. And that is why we have to facilitate the situation for this to happen. What have we done, or what are we doing in terms of creating tools for this relocation to occur effectively? We have opened up at the Department of Economy a website called Invest in Mexico that allows you to go in and find everything, and I say everything, but Rogelio is gonna be mad about this. It lets you know about all of the procedures and documentation that needs to be presented for these purposes. I've always thought that one of the best things that we can do is eliminate bureaucracy. However, this site is just for helpful purposes. We also have Data Mexico that portrays or provides a general analysis of the current situation. You can say, you know what, I want to set up a company with this profile, and it will provide you with a perspective that I'm sure nobody else can develop in terms of the level of complexity and benefits in that sector, to see where it would be convenient to set up based on the benefits. We also have an office within the Department of Economy. We know that the virtual world provides us with many advantages, but whoever wishes to come visit us will also be well received in terms of meeting planning and fostering. Dr. de la Mora has done great work in terms of making this concrete. We have been working with states to find further opportunities. We have constant, continuous communication with them so that these opportunities are not lost. And we have also been working on talent development for the short, medium, and long run. Every minute we lose in terms of technology and digitization and training is money lost, and especially it's an opportunity lost that leaves more people behind instead of considering that this is a circumstance of not knowing how to use technology. And that is why the government of Mexico is working on making access to technology available to all people everywhere in our country, regardless of the size of the entity or state. I'm going to talk to you about something that surprised me as to what people do to achieve their goals regarding the use of technology in communities where there is no internet access. There's an internet taxi, let's say, an internet Uber. People will write their messages. They'll look for that internet car to connect and then go back home. That can no longer be the case. We need people to have access. We used to talk about the possibility of learning how to read and write. Now we talk about the possibility to have access to technology because we can no longer leave anyone behind and pay the price at the national level of having people left back. What are we looking for in terms of the high-level economic dialogue? Large companies with local supply and creating these chains also through the department of Monica Duhem who works with Secretary de la Mora. Also the train project. There is a project that is very interesting that will be undertaken shortly to connect Sinaloa and I was going to say Texas, but we're going to look to connect with New Mexico because we cannot have all of our eggs in one same basket. And we want to use trade as for better use. We cannot use trade for political purposes. We cannot live through what we went through a few weeks ago. We have been working with the IDB, like we said, to be able to support SMEs and have them reach other levels, and also so that they can grow further and achieve better results, and that will in turn provide larger companies with better results as well. Results that I think it would be worthwhile to share in terms of an area that could benefit from this. The northern region of the country, this region, this zone that the president created at the beginning of his administration, I must say that when you provide specific benefits, results are clear. Last year in 2021, the manufacturing industry grew by 12.4%. And I think that this shows an increase of 4% 4% higher than the rest of the country. I can't remember if it was yesterday or the day before. Someone was saying that the country was at 3.4%. However, if we analyze this by zones or by regions, last year we were at 4.2 and the border region was at 3.9. In terms of taxpayers, we managed to increase collection by benefits in this region. We increased collection with 20,000 more taxpayers. What does this mean? That all of these efforts are worthwhile, no matter how small. We can always incentivize our economy and foster recovery. I hate using the word difficult because when we talk about difficult situations, we set up a list of connotations right next to it that makes us tense. Without a doubt, if you are here today, it's because you have the tools to be here. And if the world brought us together right now, it's because we have the ability to face the challenges that are in front of us today. I think that I would like to wrap up with this. We have two crucial topics that we're going to be covering without rest in terms of this regulatory committee and digitization of procedures. This needs to become a reality to reduce bureaucracy and prevent these sunken costs and preventing this data, this information to be useless and difficult to comply with. It just makes us lose time and resources, and it causes one more person to remain jobless. We're still designing scholarships for the training and development of high-level professionals in the semiconductor industry, among others, and that is something that I want to highlight that we're doing at the Department of Economy. We're also inviting all of you to not only trust again, but invest and reinvest, and also convey the message in terms of why we need to retake these competitive advantages as a country, not only due to the privileged location that we have, due to the treaties that we have signed, but also because in each Mexican there is great talent that wakes up every morning looking to make Mexico better. Thank you.
We wish to thank Secretary Clouthier for her words. We will continue with today's agenda in a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Invitamos a todos los asistentes a ocupar sus lugares.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Arrancamos 10 días. Voy a volver a insistir entonces que ya se Yorio. Estamos en contacto. Sí. Gracias.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats so we can continue with today's event.
Igual, los siguientes
Dear panelists of the next session, please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. And dear panelists, please come to the stage and take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We salute the participants of the first panel who will talk about the private sector role as growth catalyzer. Flavio Cardozo, CEO for Latin America of the American Tower Corporation. Rodrigo Mariscal, head of the Economic Planning Unit of the Treasury Department of Mexico, and Hector Orellana, Vice President and Director General of North America of Medtronic, Luis Miguel González, Editorial Director of The Economist, El Economista, who will be today's moderator. Good morning. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first panel of the day. It is a privilege for me to engage in a conversation with these businessmen for 15 minutes. We will try to talk about one of the main mysteries of economic growth, investment. Why does investment take place or not? Why is investment more heavy in certain sectors rather than others? Why doesn't it appear in whenever seemingly obvious opportunities are there? So, and I'm sure that this panel will reflect part of this mystery. In order to unveil the mystery, public-private dialogue is required, and dialogue between sectors and nationalities is also required. We need more women. We need women in this panel, of course, as it is obvious, but it is highly representative of the major challenges we face today. Telecom infrastructure, a business person, a businessman from the healthcare sector, that as a sector has led us to rethink the logics of development and economic growth. And we have a public official with us as well, who provides us with the opportunity of having an overview of the mystery of investment from the public arena. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Hector, Rodrigo. I will not ask questions. I will just try to address your concerns, and this will be a brief dialogue between the speakers. Let's start with you, Rodrigo. Welcome. Thank you very much. And first of all, I wish to apologize because I do not speak Spanish. I am Brazilian, and I'm going to speak a hybrid language between Spanish and Portuguese. I'm the representative of the infrastructure sector. I'm happy to be here. I represent American Tower, which is a developer and owner of digital infrastructure, towers, fiber, and in a certain way, we've been present in Mexico since 1999. Mexico was the first country outside the U.S. where we moved our operations to, with 600 employees, 10,000 sites, around 30% of infrastructure site for cellular communication, optical fiber, among different data centers. We were talking earlier, and I see infrastructure almost as if it were the foundation where fiber is built upon. We have a foundation. This is a foundation, and on top of infrastructure, we add the capacity of connectivity. Interconnectivity and connectivity provides us with an opportunity to develop business, as we saw during the pandemic, to enable remote work and to guarantee continuity if mobility is constrained. Those of us can keep on working, and those who are in part of the digital economy, and that's the challenge. The challenge of bridging the digital gap. Mexico and many countries are still facing that challenge, and infrastructure is an enabler. So we're completely interested, we're fully interested in working alongside the government in the competitive and economic landscape space to create investment opportunities so we can draw more people to the digital sphere. Just to wrap up this part of the conversation, around 80% of the population in urban areas are connected to the internet, but only 50% in rural areas. That is to say, the opportunity to continue to invest is there and to bolster digital inclusion and to narrow the infrastructure gap and the connectivity gap as well. Flavia has just said that in the cities, 80% of the population is connected, but 50% in rural areas. This is a social issue. The social gap, the digital gap is a social issue, but it is also a business opportunity, and it's a sort of mandate for the future. Hector. In the last 3 years, have devoted more time to reflect upon the health sector than what we had devoted in the last 3 decades. Of course, these 2 years have allowed us to see the connection between health and economic development. It had never been so evident. And we in the healthcare sector are accessing a new level. We now understand things, and things are completely different. I'm the representative of Medtronic, and it's a medical technology leader in Mexico. We are highly committed to Mexico. Beyond the fact that we're global leaders, we have 4 manufacturing sites in Mexico with over 14,000 employees, mainly devoted to technology development, with 300 million units of exports on an annual basis. The opportunities provided and generated by Medtronic in the technology sphere and as business opportunities is highly significant. And our main focus today is to provide access to technologies manufactured in Mexico and to open up the access to the Mexican society, because today we see a transformation in the healthcare system that is also trying to provide access to that 50% of the population that lacks of health coverage today. So it is an opportunity of development to provide access to our technologies to the population that is in need of help and does not necessarily have access to the latest technology. We'll return to this topic because it's an endearing topic to me. You know, Mexico is a medical technology exporter, but it does not necessarily have such a developed internal market as it should in the sector. So I'll come back to you to talk about this, if you may. Of course, whenever you want, and nobody's going to leave. Rodrigo Mariscal. Hello. I work at the Ministry of the Treasury. What we've seen at the ministry is that public and private investment is key, and it accounts for 56% of employment in Mexico. I'm referring to companies, firms, businesses. It is key for investment. It makes up 18% of the GDP. 80% of what is invested in Mexico comes from the private sector, and the Ministry of the Treasury understands that they also contribute to 24% of the tax revenues. So it is key to encourage further investment. One of Mexico's Mexico's main challenges, as Fabio mentioned, is that private investment only flows towards growing ends, but in the southeast of Mexico, the investment hasn't reached yet, or it is scarce, and we need to invest even more so these regions start to grow at the same pace as the center of the country, so the whole country will grow and develop together. Rodrigo. The audience and the different participants are here because global value chains, are they fractured or are they being redefined? Can you, if you analyze the global economy, however we contemplate it, it entails huge issues. So how will the value chains incorporate the Mexican South or Southeast? Although the main challenge is that Mexico should participate in more value cases. We have success cases in medical technology, in the food industry, but there are other sectors as well. And how does the Ministry of Treasury contemplate this? And I will add Hector and Rodrigo to this question. Two interesting things have gone on throughout the world regarding the value chains, because the geopolitical context is changing and it will continue to change now with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And a globalization process is taking place. We resort less to commerce and we focus more on the inside. So Mexico and the Latin American region has huge potential to invest in the value chains and to start to shut down the commercial bonds between those countries. This is key. And another key aspect is to try to find dynamic sectors. The services sector, we don't see it much. We're more focused on export and manufacturing, but it is a sector in Mexico with huge potential. Mexico has entered into 40 commercial treaties with over 50 countries of the world, which accounts for 50% of the global GDP. In theory, our potential is to access a huge market. However, our focus has not necessarily been to fully embrace all of that, to tap into everything. So we need to continue to work on that. Flavio, you live in Miami, and the company you represent since 1999 started operations in Mexico. What opportunities do you see? Can you give us an approach to providing coverage to the rural sector? Because in any case, we're talking about a huge area of opportunity, and I'm talking often about vulnerable groups or low-income families. How can not necessarily the usual suspects become part of this economy and of the consumption economy? The telecom sector and the infrastructure to enable telecommunications is everywhere around the value chains of the world. If you take a look at the radio and telecom sector, it accounts around 3% of the GDP. In 2021, the investment was 1 billion pesos. 75% of that amount of money went to infrastructure. I don't know the figure exactly, but most of it goes to the usual suspects, those people who are already connected. I'm sure connectivity can be improved and infrastructure can be improved where it already exists, but we still need to develop it where people are not connected or badly connected. The different studies have reached to the conclusion that around at every 8% of bandwidth penetration, 2% affectation to the GDP may arise. So the opportunity is to bring infrastructure connectivity to rural areas, which is something similar to what the shared grid is doing. We can include rural areas and the social coverage because it doesn't necessarily draw in the necessary investment. So public policy should be there in order to incentivize investment towards this direction. What does your board of directors demand from you when you're in front of them and you say that, you've been milking a reliable cow for so long, but you now have to access high potential sectors, but in Latin America with social and political risks? How do you engage in that dialogue? Well, we want to promote competition, and that there's a reliable and trustworthy environment where competition is bolstered, because it is key to us to share infrastructure. That is to build a tower for many operators, so you can use perhaps shared optical fiber. It's a type of efficiency we add to the industry. So if you're going to provide coverage to a rural area, it's senseless that 3 operators each have their own towers. If we can all share one tower between the 3 of us, we can share energy services, optical fiber. We can bring and inject efficiency to the industry, because that is important, especially to the areas that will be the target of our operations. You're bringing up a relevant concept, that the environment promotes sound and fair competition, a type of innovation that rewards those who do what's right and who work properly. The medical industry is one of the huge surprises if we analyze foreign trade figures, because it is the performance of our operations in the medical sector. I would like to add on to what Luis said. The qualified workforce in Mexico that has turned us into the 6th medical technology producer due to devices. Mexico is strongly positioned in that arena, but unfortunately, consumption of those products has not been as relevant in the healthcare sector. And the Minister of the Treasury already mentioned this, because it is a great opportunity to stimulate local consumption for these products. And of course, we need to try and address regulation, digitalization topics, so we become even more competitive, so these products can reach people easily, so we can also become more attractive to continue to increase manufacturing lines and to expand investment. It's funny though, in Medtronic, now that we're speaking about healthcare and the pandemic, of course we're a relevant player when it comes to mechanical ventilation. In Mexico, most consumables requiring therapy are manufactured in the north of the country. And we have heart valves that are manufactured in Mexico. And Mexico has indeed the expertise to manufacture a product that will remain in the human body, abiding by all the requirements. So we need to continue exploring these features to continue to stimulate investment, and so it can be more attractive. And if our legislation and regulation allows us to accelerate all these processes, then for sure we will also be able to provide further access, which is one of our main concerns. We want to be allies of both the public and private healthcare systems, so Mexicans can access top-notch technologies and the sense of patient recovery when there's a disease, to accelerate that recovery and reintegrate that person to productive life as soon as possible. You're being quite nostalgic, perhaps. We would like Mexicans to have access to products of importation. So what do we need? So the gap is bridged by consuming more massively and generally in Mexico. I think that the regulatory affair there is to accelerate product registration process so we can access top-notch technologies, just as we are moving on in manufacturing the technology, so that technology can reach directly to the patient. Rodrigo. You heard Flavio, you heard Oscar talk about what what opportunities are envisioned by the private sector. The Ministry of the Treasury is like the control tower for all of that. So what do you think? Yes, of course. These are extremely relevant topics. These are the challenges we're currently facing. The whole regulation aspect can always be improved. We can always simplify and streamline the fiscal services, and we can streamline the standards because it is key. And I also agree with investment in infrastructure as part of the budget. What we've tried to do, at least to what pertains to our administration, is to try to increase public investment as much as possible without it falling apart, because it may cause a fiscal issue. So this year, our proposal is an increase of 3.1% of infrastructure expenses, and our estimation for next year is that the expenditure will reach 2.8. So what the Ministry of the Treasury is trying to do is to bolster investment infrastructure even further, to connect disconnected sectors, and to continue to support those relations already existing. So it's a key channel to continue building the growth platforms. In your intervention, you shared some data, and one of the data, I'm sure you know and the audience knows, out of every 7 pesos invested by the private sector, 1 peso is invested in the public sector, which does not mean that 1 peso will not necessarily make the difference. That is that we're trying, we're increasing infrastructure investment. And Flavio here is the Telecom representative. Hector is the health sector and medical technology representative. What other sectors need to sit at the table to discuss on public-private investment? In my opinion, a huge challenge faced by Mexico, which is very unique regarding the different Latin American countries, is that we do not have a large banking sector. It is not deep enough. And the percentage of loans granted to the non-financial banking sector in Mexico is around 40%. It is 70% in Chile. No, in Brazil is around 70%, and in Chile around 125. So if the banking penetration level is precarious and businesses need access to loans, since they don't have it, they need to use working capital and internal resources to continue to fund and grow. So a key thing that we need is to have a deeper financial sector and mechanisms, financial and funding mechanisms. Thank you, Hector. You represent a company with presence in several Latin American countries. You live in Puerto Rico. So how is Mexico seen in the continent? When you hear about Mexico, is it a natural candidate to be the winner in nearshoring and value chain relocation? What do you think of your sector regarding Mexico, or Mexico within your sector? Thinking about Mexico means that it's a great Latin American country and leader. I would love the fact that that advantage could be reflected and translated not only in manufacturing, but in education, in technical issues, knowledge, and new technologies development. For the organization, Mexico continues to be a great opportunity as long as we provide access to Mexicans, access to technology, and that is our great opportunity. How can we unveil Mexico's full potential in terms of health and the advantages posed by the proximity with the United States? So through mechanisms, we can continue to export, or we can continue to facilitate investment. Can you share something about your investment plan? Where have you invested? What is the logic of investing in Mexico and other countries? In my area, Medtronic is strongly present in Central America and the Caribbean. It made significant investment, and these are all companies that entail great opportunities to our countries due to the development, to work opportunities, among others. On top of that, Medtronic, as a company, is concerned that the product it manufactures and the technology reaches the patient. We are still convinced that it is our responsibility to reach more patients on a daily basis, and it will happen through different investment. As you see in Mexico and as we do elsewhere, we're about to turn 50. And I'm not talking about short-term investment. We could also talk about the investment done on annually to improve the infrastructure we have in Mexico. Hence, Medtronic is thinking about investment in the long term, and it's an investment through the 4 manufacturing plants of millions of dollars. The mystery of investment is a relevant topic. Naturally, public-private investment is concentrated in Mexico from center to south. What do you need to increase the investment in Mexico? We've been talking to different states in the south, and they always react similarly. The interest of the public sector is similar for the development of the southeast. So we are open to investing in the southeast by taking into account and believing that this may be a catalyzer to provide further access of our products to our patients. And this will be the main element as long as the project is there, so we can have dedicated lines to have products and the developed technology for the country, for local consumption. I believe that it could be an element that may trigger investment in the southeast. Of course, there are spaces, initiatives, and concerns by the local government in the southeast with whom we have interacted with, and we have explored that, but we need this project that will allow us together as private initiative with the local entities and the federal government to converse and to make the final decision of investing with a clear project. And it's best that we do it with a specific technology in the country.
Are you referring to a specific kind of project? Yeah, something that might be required in terms of consumption in the country. When we consider these 2 years and 2 months of pandemic, we think about the health sector, but in your first intervention, you very assertively pointed out that we were also able to live relatively well and comfortably in our homes thanks to the telecommunications infrastructure. Where is the telecommunications infrastructure right now in Mexico? Where is it headed? How do you see it in terms of the new trends? I'm thinking about 5G, but so many other things. How attractive is Mexico as a destination for investment for what's coming? In a way, what we were able to do during the pandemic was a consequence of investments that made at other moments. We need to think about the future, about what else we can do. That's an excellent point. Some of us were very comfortable at home. I think we have to highlight that. Others weren't so much because they did not have connectivity or to work or study or do whatever it is that they had to do. But that's an excellent point. I'd like to say 2 things to this regard. First, when we compare Mexico to other countries, there's a cost of the spectrum. When we talk about the spectrum, we talk about radio frequency used in telecommunications. That's like the gasoline that we use for companies, right? The larger the spectrum, the better the services or the more services we can offer. So that has a cost here in Mexico. It could represent 22, maybe even 30% of the incomes of an operator, while in other markets it might represent 6%. Where does it represent 6%? Other international markets that are more developed in this to this regard with other policies. So when we talk about this, we also talk about 5G, how to make investments more agile, how we can work, for example, in the Southeast and make more viable other services in the health or financial sector to help bank get people involved in the digital economy. When we talk about 5G, we all think about connected machines and amazing services, but we need to set the base a little better. 5G is going to coexist with 4G. We have a lot of work to do still in Mexico and in other Latin American countries in terms of 4G. And after that, create policies to attract investment when we're going to go through the bid for broadening the spectrum. An example of something that happened last year. Brazil rolled out the largest 5G bid, 2,000 megahertz approximately, were opened up for bidding, and it was a model that was very attractive in terms of investment. Only 15% was applicable for tax collection, and 85% was allocated in terms of investment commitments regarding coverage in schools and areas that weren't connected, etc. So there's a balance there in terms of that basically incentivizes the investor to work on this infrastructure so as to work on the development of the economy. How did that bid go about? I assume, given the size of Brazil, it's been the largest in Latin America. So how did that go down? 1 year later, how's it going? Well, it's beginning, let's say. Touching on how that compares to Mexico, we've had different moments, let's say. We're at different moments in our histories. Mexico is preparing for 5G, let's say, and there is a kind of concentration here in Mexico. Obviously, this is something that depends on the evolution of the market. We believe that Mexico has a lot of work to do to develop 4G and set up 5G through policies that will incentivize these investments. We are well within the normal cycle, a little bit behind compared to Brazil and Chile, maybe. But I think it's the right time for the country. Hector and Flavio proposed something that, from a public dialogue perspective between companies and government, sounds logical. Besides investment, besides public expenditure, companies expect rules of the game, signals that say the Treasury responds in terms of budget, but naturally it's the leader of the economic package, let's say, or cabinet. When the private sector asks for something that is not considered in the budget, but in terms of institutional functioning, how does the Mexican government respond? How do they feel in that dialogue? I insist, sometimes, as complicated as it is to talk about money, it's easier to resolve an issue in terms of investment than one in terms of a legal framework or competitiveness. Of course, let's say the departments and the different actors, different stakeholders are very difficult to coordinate. From the Department of Treasury, we oversee the budget aspect, and we try to include all political stakeholders and the economic cabinet members to prioritize what we need to do. The budget, let's say, is like a blanket element. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and we have to use it that way. So what we need to do is promote dialogue and those areas in which that has to be considered. But on the other side, in the public sector, what we have been doing is try to look for quality investments. And why do I mean by this, and why do we look for them? We want these investments to be maintained and to be sustainable. What do I mean by quality investments? Coming from companies that pay taxes, that comply with regulations and standards at an international level in terms of the environment, for example, but also that they have a good and adequate dealing in terms of wages, so that it can be maintained through time. So these have been the priorities. This is the approach that we have undertaken in terms of long-term investing. About what Rodrigo is saying, and also going back to the point of what an important point is for us to come in with investment. A healthy environment, a sustainable environment with competitiveness and considering the long term. We always talk about long-term investment. We never talk about short-term investment, because if we need a lot of capital to work, then it's going to be long-term. So there needs to be competitiveness. There needs to be a sustainable environment, and that is crucial for us. Mainly in situations where large investments are made. For example, when we talk about 5G, we're talking about 10 times more antennas than what we have today. So we have to multiply by 10. So how much is that worth? A lot. And we can't do it alone. That's why we share infrastructure. That's why we need an environment of competitiveness where several stakeholders, several players, let's say, could play with that same infrastructure. And that way we can make viable different kinds of services. You asked me about the government of Brazil. The government of Brazil has had a lot of success in digitizing government services in 4G. And that is going to allow us to explore so much more in 5G, but 4G is already there. We can begin now by creating this environment so that that investment can work for us. I think it's similar in terms of investment. As the secretary was saying, obviously providing access to technology to all those Mexicans that could have access to all these elements. We understand that we can't do this alone. We understand that we are not the ones who will be able to resolve this or change everything. It's the same scenario in the health sector. There needs to be clear rules, opportunities, and competitiveness to be able to provide the best health services and health environment for Mexicans all around. In terms of the health sector, that's what we're looking for, how to reach more Mexicans. Thank you. When we think about sustainability and we go over what has been going on, especially in terms of discussions with entrepreneurial groups, stock exchanges, business roundtables in the United States, etc. It turns out that in the last 3 years, the sustainability line has become much more complex, much more challenging for the public and private sector. We're talking about environmental, political sustainability. We're talking about social sustainability, and we're talking about rights, but also obligations of and responsibilities of the private sector, a private sector that expects the government to set the rules, help in compliance, and foster an evolution of said rules. How do you see, we're in 2022, we're in Mexico, on the other side of the world, there's a war going on, we're just coming out of a pandemic. how can we make that discussion on investment be reflected on more evolved communities, more connected, more cohesive societies? How can we gain competitiveness? I think a big lesson for Latin America is that competitiveness cannot come at the against other elements in society. I think that digital inclusion is crucial, and education, of course. If we have inclusion and education, then that's part of the base. Those are the pillars of where we're going to build our investments on and look for results. So I see that unifying this in terms of investment challenges, setting up investments and services and helping us bring about more education and share this with more people, with communities that are not participating currently, that can also bring value to our economy and be included in the GDP of our country. The other day, I was talking with a CEO of a retailer company here in Mexico, and we were saying with digital inclusion, he can take the store to the consumer. The consumers that physically go to the store, that are at the store in person, are but a small percentage of the clients. But when connected, they can take the store to the consumer. We can take banking services to the consumer, and that is sustainable. There are people who have given up on not on having services. And that can be improved, that can be bettered with investment. There's a very cruel saying here in Mexico. We say that it's very expensive to be poor here in Mexico. And part of breaking the cycle involves digital inclusion, education, like you said. From your perspective, how? I think it's a reflection of what Medtronics does on this topic. In terms of principles and values, obviously we have to consider our behaviors as a corporate citizen in our country that complies with all of the guidelines, with all of the rules, with all of, we're talking about tax paying, good salaries, good wages, etc. So that's what we do, being competitive, and not only with these basic elements in terms of wages and tax paying, but also in terms of development and equity and ethics and all of these other values. In Mexico, we are an example with the 14,000 employees that we are. We look for development and recognition in terms of equality, women's development, and among other things. So complying with legislative aspects, complying with good wages, etc., but taking all that beyond our responsibility in terms of Mexicans' health. Training doctors, having the staff necessary that is involved with our processes so that we can provide better coverage in terms of technology and receiving care as a patient. So that's what we are convinced of, and that's what we have been doing for the past 50 years in Mexico to truly be able to reach success and foster investment. The challenge of attracting, promoting, retaining, growing quality investments. How much of your time as a public official does that take? In terms of the dialogue, no longer with the public sector, within the government, how is that? What does that picture look like? In terms of the public sector, I think that we need to always be facilitators. So what we do is we have so many tasks. One of the tasks that the secretary was mentioning was setting the macroeconomic basis and developing stability. So what we have been doing in Mexico is just that, setting the basis of a sustainable growth from a fiscal perspective, so that these don't affect the economy, that they don't start causing debt issues. So I believe that we have been very successful in terms of that part and looking for a balanced budget. But we are also holding several dialogues with the academic sector, the private sector, the unionized sector, etc., in terms of so as to improve and create partnerships that will conclude or be translated into policies to be able to address relevant issue. Gender is something that we are very aware of, that we bear in mind, because Mexico is a country in which women have a very little participation in the workforce, and that's terrible because they have the same number of school years than men, the same level of education. So one of the calculations that we made at the department was that if we managed to increase women's participation to a reasonable level, let's say at the average of Latin America, we could have a further growth of 1.4, 1.6% of the GDP only by incorporating women. Héctor Orellana, Fabio Cardoso, for a moment, let's imagine that you are advisors to the President of Mexico and the Secretary of Treasury, and you have to do something to detonate great investment in nearshoring, a qualitative change, almost a quantum change. What would you recommend the Mexican government do? Without a doubt, there are specific things I could say in this situation about the sector. I think that we have had the opportunity to channel these concerns. But in general, I would say there is knowledge and there's experience that we have in terms of the private initiative, the private sector, that I think that we could take advantage of for these strategies with clarity, and I would advise they make us part of the conversation beyond delving into specific topics, specific areas of the sector. I want to insist, and I'll be with you in a moment, Flavio, we are aware that this is a historical moment. There's a change here going on. I would compare this to the fall of the Berlin Wall. The world is changing, and the great opportunity for Mexico, as like NAFTA was at its point, the great opportunity for Mexico is to be on the map, to be put on the map for nearshoring in a more vigorous and aggressive way. Besides being a part of that round table, being heard, I think that there are specific processes that could be addressed in terms of medical equipment. There are segments, there are specific areas that require medical device manufacturing that could improve conversations in terms of the sterilization industry. I think these things could make a difference in the sector to detonate our capacity to export, but also to supply local consumption. We have to say that the internal market in Mexico is as large as some countries in Europe that we usually see as leaders. We're talking about here, we're seeing a great opportunity that Mexico represents in this sense right now. Flavio Cardoso, you have the chance to be heard and to say, this is what you need to do. What should we do? I think Mexico has an advantage because you're Canada and the US's neighbor due to its geographic location. You have that tie. So how can we accelerate from an infrastructure perspective? How can we accelerate competitiveness in Mexico? Productivity, digitization, automation. so many things, infrastructure, for example, in data centers and cloud and computer systems. There are so many things for which Mexico is an excellent option because you're the neighbors. We acquired a data center company in the United States, but there's a lot of interest from the United States in terms of Mexico because Mexico is far away from the conflict area. So there are so many things that can be done to accelerate that competitiveness and that participation as an option, as a significant option for North America. You say we can do more in terms of data centers and everything having to do with infrastructure, the infrastructure that participates in that ecosystem of digitization. I'd like to delve deeper into this. What does it mean to do more? Well, we need to start with basic things, how to make viable the deployment in areas where there is no deployment, how to increase the supply in terms of infrastructure and services so that different companies can use them. How can we connect communities for them to become more competitive and produce more? So Mexico's participation as an option in the value chain. So I would start with those basic things. Where are we standing? How are we currently? And where are we going? Today, we have the necessary infrastructure. We have the investment necessary. 5G, for example, is it late or is it coming in competitively? 5G already exists in some countries. Here, it'll probably begin soon, but we're still a few years out in terms of massifying more advanced services. We're probably a few years out still. It's not something that's going to happen immediately. You are at the Department of Treasury, Rogelio. How are you analyzing, what is your take on the national strategy in terms of nearshoring? I insist, there's a big appetite on the outside, and I speak as someone who is looking in from the outside every day. I see the appetite that we see on the outside, and it's contrasting with a Mexico that seems to sometimes be satisfied with the levels of investments that we have and sometimes need so much more. I insist, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Totally. I think that Mexico and Latin America have an amazing opportunity at this point in time because the conflict is not occurring in our region. Besides, we have a population that is mainly young. In Mexico, 50% of people are under 30 years of age. And we also have natural resources, and our territory is quite extensive. We have access to both oceans. And when it comes to advanced economies, what we're seeing is that they're having a lack of job offers. So we have a lot of possibility here. And the only thing that we need to add to the equation is to provide better training, because the investments that are coming in, what we have been talking about with the people that are coming in, the fact is that they need more trained, more skilled labor forces. And I'm not saying highly skilled with over 12 years of schooling, of university, but people knowing how to speak English, knowing how to use a computer. I mean, basic skills that we need to develop and we need to provide our citizens with, so that when these companies come in, they can take advantage of all the things that we have to offer. I think that mainly we're out of time. I'd like to ask each of you in 1 minute to express express your ideas in terms of what we need to take home. What can we do to detonate investments? Where are we? Anything that might be relevant for you, for the general public, that is watching us, the audience. Well, thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. As I had said, infrastructure is about making things viable. With infrastructure, we can set the crucial base to create opportunities, to build opportunities on it, whether it has to do with communications or any part of the economy, digital inclusion, participation of communities, education, etc. So there's lots to do with things that already exist. Technology works, we participate in it, and during the pandemic, we saw how continuity is possible. But that is valid for those who were included in the participation when it comes to digital technology. The second point is accelerate and improve the investment for the environment for investments. I believe sustainability and health and participation. I see a lower concentration because Mexico has concentrations in the market, but it would be an important piece to attract investment. And as I was saying a few moments ago, the cost of the spectrum and how to create policies for the next bids, how we can do things to incentivize investments, less collection and more promoting. So you leave us with very relevant ideas. The digital gap as a big issue that has a solution from a private investment perspective. Having a more competitive field that is more equal and more promoting. What conclusion do you want to leave us with? I agree. I think that we need to improve competitiveness in several sectors. There are some in which we need additional efforts. I think that we need to ask ourselves how we can deepen the effectiveness of the financial system and how to provide more financial access to people and companies. I think that this is crucial. Increase women's participation in the economy. I think that's also a role that something that can play a big role in terms of change and growth and improving the social relationship that we have in Mexico. Access and looking to incorporate regions in Mexico that have been isolated and that are not active yet. That will expand the internal market completely and will provide us with more capacity for growth.
Hector, Luis, let me get back to the start of this conversation, and you underscored the strength of the medical devices and medical technology industry in Mexico. Undoubtedly, it has huge potential, and due to our proximity with one of the world's main health consumers, it reinforces what you just said. Medtronic, over time, it is clear that if it has a clear decision to continue to invest in Mexico, to grow productive activity, to grow commercial activity, to create competitive jobs and further development. It is clear that in the new health age and the current situation in the country, we can be a strategic and key ally of the government as to provide access to healthcare with the full potential that you reiterated. That's where the great opportunity lies in, and it cannot be a one-sided effort. It has to be a group. It has to be a component alongside the government. Thank you very much. A big show of hands for panelists. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We invite you to stay for our next panel. I want to thank our panelists for joining us.
Continuando con el programa.
Next, we kindly invite the next speakers who will converse about budget expenditure, infrastructure, and regional development.
¿Sabes dónde están los baños?
We invite the next speakers who will talk about budget allocation, infrastructure, and regional development. Please, ladies and gentlemen, take your seats so we can continue with today's agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The conversation will be on regional infrastructure development and public expenses. We have Juan Pablo de Botton, Undersecretary of the Expenditure, Edmundo Rosales Lopez, Head of the National Association of Mexican Customs, Oscar del Cueto Cuevas, Chairperson and Director General of Kansas City Southern of Mexico, and Claudia Esteves Cano, Director General of the Mexican Association of Private Industrial Parks, and today's moderator, Nimia Almeida, Senior Vice Chair of the Moody's Financial Corporation, who will be our moderator. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm grateful for this invitation. Thank you for inviting me to talk about something really important for Mexico, such as infrastructure. As you know, I work in Moody's, and Moody's has reduced Mexico's growth expectations. It used to be 3% in November last year, and we moved to 1.6% by February this year, and we're in 0.1 this year within a 4-month period. One of the reasons why we applied this rating is due to lack of investment growth in the areas of investment and infrastructure, as well as investment for the export sector, which is one of the most important growth vehicles for the country. Mexico's rating is in BW A1 with a negative perspective. And once again, the negative perspective of this rating includes all growth aspects. And I wanted to share with you this context because growth does not only have to do with that, it also has to do with the war in Ukraine. It has to do with the inflation that will have a take on consumption. It also involves the interest rates. So the context is much broader. But infrastructure as a topic is extremely important. This is why I would like to start with Juan Pablo in this context. Thank you very much for joining us today. Expenditure. To us, you call it expenditure, but everybody else calls it investment. So when you tell us that you're going to spend, we are asking ourselves is what are you going to invest on? So this question is, how do you choose the projects? What are your prioritary projects? Perhaps these are regional projects and some of them are more important than others. How do you perform that analysis? How do you choose the projects and how do you become more or less interested in some or others? I think it's an interesting question because at the end of the day, we have to deal with a couple of key responsibilities to increase the income of the population at the mid and short term. That's why today's development model is so important, and the investment that involves reducing inequality and achieving social well-being. And sometimes you don't get to see the relation between both things. But in Mexico, we had very significant highways, some of them in Veracruz, others in Oaxaca, and due to social issues, they had not been completed. But with the same level of expense, you couldn't have the same efficiency because certain works could not be completed. So there's a direct relationship between that, and we're providing constant support to the population. This year, the expenditure budget is of over 300 billion pesos for social investment and direct support to those in need, and a significant growth of 18.1%, which is a historical growth under the new methodology that started out in 2011. This is the physical investment level, the highest investment rate of the government ever since, with due to the large high hours of connectivity, and we can talk about that. Go ahead. About the hours of connectivity, we believe it to be relevant because the development model established by Mexico also involves regional development, not only central development, but we are trying to provide coverage to unaddressed regions. The Mexican Southeast is where most investments are going on, and they involve over 2.6 thousand kilometers of railways being built and enabled, not only for passenger transportation that will assist the tourism and will not only benefit the Cancun area, but the agro industry and other industries will also be able to transport their products. Most people believe that, most trade in Mexico comes from Nuevo Laredo, from Kansas, and as well as industrial production. But on the other hand, you perhaps cannot see that in Puerto Progreso, we are exporting over $1 billion, which may increase significantly once the entire Southeast is connected. So we're trying to invest to favor the profitability of private investment. That's what we're trying to do with the Mine Train project and with the Tehuantepec Isthmus, that is a logistic project platform to the east of the U.S. This is music to our ears because you're talking about efficiency. Eliseo, in the trade, import, export context, what are the Mexican customs doing? So costs for the company. Importing and exporting companies can go down, prices can go down to have a more efficient service. Thank you very much for having me. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, through the National Customs Agency, what is it that we want for the competitive world we're living in? We want to have customs services with infrastructure and with staff, with properly trained staff in order to deal with foreign trade properly. If we do our job, if our customs system is efficient, if we have trained staff with the right infrastructure, we will assist the trade process, and we will also develop the work we have to do. We will continue to work on what we have to. So we are part of that national project where we will work in tandem in full coordination with the federal government entities, with the Army, with the Navy, with the Ministry of the Treasury, with whom we're working on certain projects to bolster the economic development and encourage foreign trade. That's great as an introduction, but I'm going to set a bit more pressure upon you in a few more minutes. Oscar, what about the railway infrastructure in Mexico? You think of it in terms of availability, quality? What about the development of railways in Mexico? Because the merchandise that will arrive and leave need to be moved. I love it when I hear the Secretary Ramírez de la O talk about the railways, and Juan Pablo mentioned it when talking about growth. 1.6 thousand kilometers of new railways, because the Southeast is also important to us. Mexico's current railway infrastructure is equally as good as what you can find in the U.S. and Canada, and it will not only connect the country to the U.S. East, but you will connect us to us. You know, we're the first railway company connecting the U.S. with the Canada, and we'll have access to the Isthmus corridor to connect us to Coatzacoalcos or Salina Cruz major port. So it's a great infrastructure, and I love to hear everything about the customs, because part of the process going on in the borders, we operate in 15 states, but we are currently operating Nuevo Laredo, which is the most important state, with joint inspections with the CDP and the taxpayer system. We have international crews that allow us to allow our train crossings easily. And the railway is the backbone of the logistic platform in Mexico. Regarding nearshoring, there are great stories. You mentioned the automotive industry, the industrial parks, and much of what the automotive industry wants is to have connectivity with the railway. In this administration is pretty much focused on trains. It has been proved with the interoceanic corridor and the Mayan train, and what we have done over these 25 years with over $5 billion investment will help us provide a railway system that will connect Mexico not only to the world, but to the U.S., to the east of the U.S. and Canada. Claudia, what are you concerned about? We're talking about investment. We're talking about growth for the country. It seems that transportation's there. There's a clear path. The customs are collaborating. What else do you need? First, thank you. Thank you very much to the organizers for having me. Concerns become occupations or things to do. As we've heard all morning, we've talked about nearshoring, the integration of productive teams, development of infrastructure. As we heard, it is important for us to put on the table the fact that industrial parks are the hotel of manufacturing, such as Secretary Clouthier called us a few days ago. So she coined the term, so I'm stealing it from her. So since we're the crib of logistics and manufacture in Mexico, it is our great responsibility to invest in quality and world-class infrastructure. Industrial parks of Mexico possess the quality infrastructure that gives us the opportunity to welcome top-notch companies. You're talking about infrastructure in Mexico, and of course, our main concern is that the development of good highways continues, bridges, roads and road safety, which is also key for foreign trade. Now that we're talking about infrastructure inside the industrial parks, well, of course, the famous triad, energy, water, and natural gas. If we have those three elements, we'll be able to develop further industry, further growth. And as the secretary mentioned this morning, the development of industrial parks at the Isthmus. And to continue with this topic, yes, we've met and the real estate developers who are partners are completely interested in industrial park development, and they should have the possibility to access infrastructure, energy, water, natural gas, and all of these items that are the foundation of development. Okay, we already know what we need. Undersecretary, what types of projects and where will these projects take place? Because we're talking about people who are investment. You just mentioned how much your company has invested in projects around transportation infrastructure, also with plenty of needs. From the government perspective, how can the government assist to the infrastructure and economic growth in Mexico? A key aspect involves how public expenditure is being organized. Projects should be part of integrated planning, which means that we should not only think about the train as a logistic platform, but gas terminals required are there, or water projects so we can have industrial parks installed. So that type of strategic planning with clarity, because I think most of us have heard talk about the Mayan train, about the Isthmus, perhaps not in full. That's why we're here. And perhaps one of the less known projects involves the Guaymas logistic corridor that will expand the port and railway connection towards Nogales, which will open up a different foreign trade artery towards the U.S. So these signs, if you can see them, are drawing in private investment. Last Thursday, we went to Veracruz with the president, and we were there at the Constellation Brands plant. They're injecting $1.3 billion in Sonora. The development banks are funding manufacturing contracts. This is a company with half German, half Mexican participation to build airspaces for aircraft, and engineers from Germany will come for knowledge transfer, and they will engage in this joint effort. It's a 15-year project supported by development banks. And in Gomez Palacio, for instance, in the lagoon sector, one of their main issues involves labor, but it is growing inside the industrial park. And it's not only an outsourcing growth, but added value too. One of my counselors at the National Financial Institute was there, and she was in charge of designing the passenger truck system. The engine was manufactured by Mercedes-Benz, but now they're doing it. And it started out last year. They have forecasted to do the same, but with electric vehicles. So If you know how to embrace the opportunity is there, and the government is currently facilitating the development of new regions as of the required projects may demand. Oscar, within the same context, to what extent is more investment required in railways and the connectivity with other transportation means that will facilitate movement within the country? What do you think about that? I don't think we have enough. Of course, there is a demand for trains and for connectivity at certain ports. We need to think about the Pacific, two major ports such as Manzanillo and Lázaro Cárdenas. Of course, we need to develop further ports. We talked about Mazatlan and Guaymas, so there is a need for infrastructure. Another case involves mentioning our evolution to electrical vehicles and nearshoring to new plants will come to Monterrey to build batteries for e-vehicles, but we do have to build the infrastructure that will support that growth. And when it comes to industrial parks, there's significant growth. The Interoceanic has an interesting project with over 10 parks located in the corridor. We have also developed intermodal terminals that will help us move containers from the ports to the country, to the rest of the country, Monterrey, Toluca. The trade can grow significantly. Nearshoring opens up a great opportunity for Mexico. And I was talking to the Undersecretary about the growth in Asia and how this North American economic bloc should be is strengthened. North America is a bit low when it comes to growth. We're a little bit behind, and this is where opportunities for investment are. The backbone is the railway, and the three countries can be connected now. So what else do we need to do to connect to trucks in the last mile? Better highways, port safety, and processes that customs can help agilize. Tatiana Clouthier, the secretary, was talking about deregulation, how to streamline processes to reach the communities in need. And the president mentioned it last night because we want a strong commercial partner in terms of the economy, not in terms of arms. So when it comes to railways and roads, we're talking about an additional 1.6 thousand kilometers, and we can reach even further. So my question is, how? We already know the how. But we already know what you want to do, but we should address the how and when, that view of improved efficiency and better prepared officials that facilitate and reduce operation costs, among others. How will that happen? What would you want to ask from your collaborators so your vision comes true? This year and for next year, we have jointly developed alongside different instances of the federal government, a whole range of projects that will bolster our efficiency so we can become foreign trade facilitators. Just to mention a case, we're ready. We have an executive project up and running to start building the OTAI 2 border control area in Tijuana, because of course we need to have a good business relation with our main trade partner, and we need to have state-of-the-art technology, and joint dispatch would be a good practice so we can all ease up the procedures, the logistic bureaucracy, so all the products and everything that needs to be imported and exported will reach its destination as quickly as possible. And that's what companies want. They want their products to reach sooner so they can be even more efficient, and they want their investment to be profitable. They don't want slow and obsolete processes. whatever equipment is no longer viable, they want to move it, and this project portfolio will strengthen the customs services in the north and southern border. How will we do that? We were going to buy non-intrusive security equipment upgraded. We will only have X-ray technology. We used to resort to gamma rays and manual searches, but we want to go even further. So searches are more efficient and quicker. We will also improve the infrastructure conditions. We will open up lanes, and we will continue to drive the situation so joint dispatch works all over the borders, because it will make things easier. Because if you're there at the at customs and you take a look, their searching procedure, I went there one day and I told them, if you're working on this on a daily basis, my God, they have a bad time because of waiting times. But joint dispatch is really practical. Both government with its corresponding institutions perform the search, the validation, and we avoid duplications. With that single clearance, we can check things out, and if there's something weird, we will stop it. If the U.S. government sees something weird, they can stop it as well, but there's just one check. And the rest of the borders, things are done traditionally. We check everything that goes out, they cross the border, and then they have to go back to another check by the U.S. government. So these practices can be really helpful. So we can also assist the business men and women. And we're also asking for best practices. Companies, institutions should help us improve foreign trade. How can we become more efficient? Those of you who are involved in those daily operations, what tools do you suggest can make our work more practical and efficient when involved in customs trade operations? Are we talking about projects? Are we going to improve? We're going to buy technology, and we continue to train our staff, most particularly the foreign trade officers, because they've been fully trained, they're highly skilled, but it is not enough. Now, during the pandemic, customs systems, customs services didn't stop. We kept on working. Why? Because for us as a nation, tariff collection is very important, because that's where the money will come from for social projects. We're the port of entry, the port of exit of our country, but we also want to do things to improve. We will invest on infrastructure, equipment, staff training, and we need to say it. There is efficient coordination now with the Navy, with the Army, and the joint effort involving customs. Yes, because it also has to do with what Claudia mentioned. She talked about security. Go ahead, Juan Pablo. Yes, I want to piggyback on what he said, because we have to honor the great job performed by the customs services of Mexico. Yes, they are buying new equipment, and the plan has been approved for 70 billion pesos for 2022-23. This is unprecedented investment in Mexico. Customs services, we're concentrated in the northern and southern borders with logistical projects. So it is something historic, and not only purchasing of equipment, which will be of the utmost importance. Of course, we need equipment, but we have also invested time, effort, and money on working in technology, such as something that hasn't yet been implemented in the world, and we're thriving to have here. The World Customs Organization calls it the 5 format, which will concentrate and integrate the data for it to be shared so the customs dispatch is more efficient, which not only includes the semi-structured tariffs but images as well, which will strengthen intelligence efforts made by customs services for arm and drug trafficking with relevant outcomes. So I wanted to reiterate the importance of the work we have conducted because resources, equipment, best practices, and coordination exist among the organizations, but there's a strong technology component. It's a comprehensive effort. And on top of that, there's something regarding the work ethics of the customs staff. They are working extended hours without hiring more staff. They're optimizing the already existing resources. Certain custom agencies have extended hours of work, so trade is moved and merchandise is moved over a longer period of time, which benefits both trade and traffic. So we no longer have those bottlenecks. These actions are part of our continuous improvement efforts that will lead us to have better customs, but they manage one of the top passenger custom services of the world, Tijuana and Nuevo Laredo, which is the strongest cargo port. So they have met up the standards and they're ready for the next level.
Claudia, you have a comment. Yes, just to add to this, I wanted to say that also Industrial Park add to the efforts in terms of customs and security, because today, the parks that today carry out trade activities are part of an authorized program, the OEA program, which is part of City Pack. And just like everyone has mentioned here, it provides that certainty to the companies that come work at these parks for those foreign trade operations, or the companies that carry out these foreign trade operations. So we are aligned from what I'm hearing. Oscar, go ahead. Yes, and maybe just to build on what was just said, I think Laredo is one great example of what can be done in terms of these joint inspections and these pre-certifications. What you were saying, due to the fact that given that companies are obtaining these authorizations before coming to the border, that facilitates all of these activities. And like Juan Pablo was saying, technology, the more equipment, the more technology we have, the better. Right now, we're about to launch the second railway bridge in Nuevo Laredo, and we're installing X-ray machines that will make more agile all things done by not only Mexican authorities but also U.S. authorities. So I think that if we all look to invest in technology, blockchain, waybills, all of these things for which we can get pre-authorization from authorities, dispatching and at destination points, all these things that would be helped out with technology, this would foster the economic and foreign trade aspect. Juan Pablo, I don't know if you'd like to comment on something that Claudia commented on: electricity, water, and natural gas. Of course, I think it's important to talk about this. Electricity supply is crucial for all things having to do with development. In term capacity, we're investing in additional capacity for these purposes. And I apologize, but going back to the isthmus, it's an area that has hydrocarbon products and gas readily available, and the necessary water projects. Veracruz is one of the regions in the country that has the most water available, and so that's why the Southeast has great potential, because you have water. We are investing in infrastructure to increase gas supply, but right now we're dealing with the capacity already. So we're even making the investments necessary for these purposes. So it is very important that we communicate these things well, because I think that in and of themselves, they're exciting. It's going to be one of the greatest ports in the Pacific coast. In a situation in which, in the situation in which we stand, I think this should be very exciting. We're going to have great capacity to import or to receive great amounts of merchandise when we have Lázaro Cárdenas or Manzanillo that are overrun. So I think that's why it's important to consider all of this. Claudia, yes, I'd like to build on this that the Deputy Secretary mentioned. Something that is very important, the number of companies, and going back to the topic of our event, the number of companies that are looking to set up and what they're requesting in terms of industrial parks and promotion is just this location, this localization as to where there's gas, where there's energy, and the advantages that Mexico has today are gigantic. And that's why I believe that we are still, without a doubt, a very important part in terms of supply chains in North America, and from a logistics perspective, customs perspective, infrastructure perspective, we are prepared, we are ready. The companies are doing this very well, but I believe that this message that we have to convey to Asian, European companies, or of any from any other region in the world have to do with this, with them being able to find here in Mexico water, energy, gas, or any kind of industrial parks with the characteristics that they need. And I would love to, in this sense, comment on the importance that the Secretary was mentioning this morning. We have so many projects right now at hand, and it's true. We receive over 100 new projects a year that no longer want to transfer to Mexico their products. They want to transfer the entire company. They want to bring it about from China, from any other region, and that is a unique opportunity. What regions? Well, industries are quite varied, and when we're talking about automotives, obviously they seek to integrate to the Bajío or northern Mexico, but we're also receiving a lot of textile and industry companies. So these are things that we're promoting in Veracruz as well, of course, and all this region in the southeast. When it has to do more with logistics, we push Yucatan forward to make things more agile and consider maritime transportation towards the United States. There's a little bit of everything. Fortunately, Mexico is very large, and something that is very important and that we mustn't forget, those of us who are here, is that the common denominator here in this equation is Mexico. Excellent. Oscar, I have a question for you in terms of what is ESG. If we want an expansion in terms of transportation, ports, etc., we want access to natural gas, electricity, water, but also we have issues related to the communities, rights of way. This is all very complicated. I imagine that the Tijuana project also had to do with issues regarding communities and the environment. So if you could share in terms of these challenges that we're facing in the 21st century regarding the environment and communities. Of course, I think that when it comes to railways, where we broaden or build additional capacity, I think that we need to be very mindful of two important things. One, communities. I think that we always need to respect everything having to do with communities, explain these projects well, and this will facilitate the situation. And that's something that I've always said in fora in the United States and Canada. When you come to Mexico, you need to be aware of how the community is doing, not only in terms of regulations and the law, how you are going to have an impact socially, how you can benefit those people. These are the important elements that are part of that checklist that you have to go through. And when it comes to the environment, today there's so much information about this. We talk about protection to of the environment. We talk about investments and not causing damage and respecting environmental zones. There's a lot of regulations to this regard. We have undertaken many projects and intermodal areas where we have to preserve one area, one green area, and that is helpful for the community as well. I think it's important to consider these elements, and that we have to bear these things in mind in our list of to-dos. Industrial parks look at this initially in terms of right-of-way. We always need to define the best route, the best access, and obviously take the community into account. Wherever the least impact is made on the community, that's better. I would recommend 5 or 6 main points in terms of respecting the community, respecting the laws, respecting the environment when it comes to construction, always looking to benefit the society you're going to immerse yourself in. There's something here regarding these things that I understand have to do with environmental impact when you set the pathways regardless of the situation with the community. And so that environmental impact obviously would have to consider all the things that step out of those speedways that are contributing to pollution, etc. And so these are challenges in terms of understanding of who pollutes where and how. Yes, of course, we always make these calculations. Let's say, I'll give you an example. We have trains that are 120 cars long. They can be intermodal or of any nature. We could go up to 240 container operated by 2 people. We eliminate the railway, believing that the railway doesn't exist. Today, we deal with 30% of the load at a national level. How many of these cars would operate in freeways? How many of these things would be out there today to calculate water? We cannot calculate these things separately. A few months ago, when we dealt with a lack of supply of different fuel shortages, we had to consider all of these. We used cars and transportation systems that were polluting less than other modes. So by these calculations, we can have an idea of the environmental impact to this regard. That's why I think that the government is very clear on this, and that's why we're betting on all of these elements. That's why we're still growing, and so that's why the environmental part is of the utmost importance. Would you like to comment? Yes, of course. Projects should always have a social component. If not, they're not going to have the success that we expect. I want to say that in Tijuana, when the border port project was developed, obviously we knew we were going to affect a part of the community. We made the project known, we sought the resources, everything was doing well, and instead of having an impact, we chose to include. How? We're going to detonate this project. We're going to generate employment. We're going to trigger that economic area with these kinds of projects that we're going to develop. I'd like to tell you about a similar case. In the decentralization program, the National Customs Agency is going to have its headquarters in Nuevo Laredo. What do we want? What does the president want with these actions? First, to get all of these agencies out of the large city, that they have to be present where things are occurring. We're going up north because we have to be close to these customs stations. But what happens with this? We're going to trigger the economy. We're going to transfer our offices there. We're going to generate employment. We're going to generate use of public transportation, commercial centers, schools, where there's going to be greater economic activity, greater activity all around. So I think that these kinds of projects, besides having that social component, were being inclusive in terms of this, of the triggering the economic area. That on one side, and on the other, also eliminating that bad image of Nuevo Laredo as a terrible place, a dangerous place. Somebody, if anyone says I'm going to Nuevo Laredo, they don't feel good about it. So we have to change that perspective, that opinion. And how are we going to do that? Through these kinds of projects. So what we want is to maintain these investments, keep these investments, and we're going to trigger that resource to activate the economic cycle of these different regions of the country. What you didn't say is in how much time. This year, we're going to hand over half of the projects, and next year, we're going to be delivering, let's say, the Otay border port, the Guaymas facility, the agency, the headquarters in Nuevo Laredo, the bridge in Tijuana is also programmed for the end of this year. The modernization of our border customs offices also this year. Equipment is also going to be provided this year. We're pushing forward. So we were going to say this. We used to say that we didn't have enough resources. Well, it's still not enough, but from what we have is going to help us push these things forward to reach our goals. Believe me that we're doing our best and pushing forward and channeling all of these efforts and resources to be efficient, to provide everyone with better services. Money is not enough. That is true. And so my question is regarding the fostering of private investment. I think that money, when you bear in mind corruption aspects and you don't increase the growth of different political apparatus aspects, and the money gets to the people that it needs to get, it's useful and it's fruitful for what you need to do. However, obviously it's not enough for all of the investment that the country requires. The country has so much to give that there's so much to invest in, and it cannot all be public investment. An example, in crude extraction, we have the part having to do with Pemex. We have the contracts that are being respected in terms of the oil rounds. We're investing in more exploration. Among other things, we're investing in improving refinement processes, but all of the chemical part, which was weakened through time, is a gigantic field that in reality has so much potential, and without a doubt that is not going to be made with public resources, but of course it's something that is going to be done in part with private investment, and we need to make sure that we have the conditions to do this, to have that we have the logistics channels. I think that at the end, there's a component that has to do with public and private investment when it comes to governance, so that the people are happy and allow investors to have a better community, a more intertwined community, and that allows us to reduce indicators of insecurity, of lack of security, and that facilitates private investment. I think that there's a great option to explore here in terms of the energy aspect that we're talking about right now, as well as the manufacturing part, and even thinking about the service sector. These having to do with the technological nearshoring and technology in general. I think that clearly it's quite broad what we can do, and we mustn't also forget that there are different activities in different regions of Mexico. And that's why what Claudia was saying is so interesting. It's interesting because maybe if you want engineers from the University of Sonora, then you set up your plant in Sonora. But if you want the quality of Oaxaca craftsmen, then you will look for those synergies over there. So considering the different characteristics of the communities of the country, I think that we have a lot to give in terms of receiving investments and having enough workers without the strong pressures in terms of costs. And obviously there's this match that we need to facilitate as government. Anyone else? Yes, I always raise my hand. I'd like to go back to these best practices and the question you posed about ESG. These are very important topics today. It's not just a simple wanting, but the fact that we must address this. Today, we have over 403 industrial parks right now. All of these with over 97% occupation, which implies a need to create new industrial parks. Right now we have 17 underway, but we are at these levels of occupation because they comply with the criteria and regulations in terms of environment, governance, but also responsible infrastructure, and of course supporting the communities and social responsibility. And of course, the challenge here, if we can mention this today, has to do with access to good financing, and not only for construction companies, but also for communities and municipalities and governments, so that the social environment and within the park can be the same outside the park. And so the investment that we can have here can come in the same terms. Going back to this need and regarding addressing the issue with the communities. Excellent. Of course, we see this every day. We see the demands of investors. They ask us, what do you think about ESG? We're doing scoring, we're doing ranking with a lot of perspective and concerned with access to investment, because if we don't have the necessary metrics, then we're not going to have access to the necessary capital, and we're not going to be able to grow. So that is vital for any kind of project, even university projects. You don't have to be in manufacturing or transportation. We need to check all of this. Oscar, you were writing things down. Yes, I think that based on what you were mentioning in terms of occupying the occupation in industrial parks, I think that should surprise us, and that needs to lead us to ask ourselves where we're headed. The interoceanic corridor, for example, we're talking about facilities with benefits in terms of water, gas access, etc., and talk about Secretary Ramírez de la O in terms of benefits and economic terms, tax exemption, support, and income tax, etc. So, and I go back to the railway issue in terms of infrastructure and how we can broaden this network in terms of connectivity and access to the United States. I think good investments have been made. The railway network in Mexico, not only in Kansas, but also in terms of our competitiveness at the border. We're now talking about new bridges in Nuevo Laredo and Presidio. I think that there are great opportunities in terms of nearshoring. This is going to bring about great opportunities, and I think that we're not going to be left behind. And I repeat, not everything can be done through the government. And I've lived through this in the processes. Whenever an automotive plant is looking for a place to be, they're not only looking for water, gas, electricity, they also need transportation. What can I get underway via train? What kind of connectivity is there towards our ports to be able to participate in markets in Europe or Asia? I was saying this to Juan Pablo before we came in, this presentation made by the president in Veracruz, in terms of how we're letting the North American region be left behind, and Asia and China specifically are growing so much. So what can we bring here from Asia so that we can do here, offering growth, offering infrastructure in railway and transportation, regulation or deregulation, so that we can become more attractive in terms of investments. I think that infrastructure in Mexico has the capacity to grow. We are at a good place, but we need more. And I think investments should be made with this in mind. I'd also like to mention something important in the context that we find ourselves in right now. I think that these things that have to do with inflation, for example, which increased around the globe due to the situation, and that reinforced due to the war in Ukraine, that is going to be in our minds throughout the rest of the year. And I think that that is going to be something to be addressed along with the private sector. We need to focus on production here in Mexico. I think that we have an issue with inflation, where inflation is reaching 8.5%. In Mexico, we're at 7.72, I think. So this will allow us to provide social security and support to people, because given our policies in terms of tariffs, that's what the Treasury is doing in terms of maintaining the prices of fuel and gas and with our current policies. So when it comes to production in the agricultural industry, so that families with lack of resources can have access to everything. So it's not only about bringing investments, but also about what kind of investments we need, and also what is the government putting on the table. I think briefly, we will be hearing the government announce a few things, not only in terms of the resources that we're investing in this, but also in terms of looking for further efficiency. Right now, given that we're talking about the customs aspect and synergies with the private sector to this regard. Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for this space. It's so important for all of this to be made, to be known. Starting in August, we're going to be working as the National Customs Agency. And I just wanted to say that our doors are always open. And with your experience, if we create these synergies, I think all things are going to be great. Hopefully more fora as this one are organized to be able to hear about the different situations that we face and see how we can all improve. We might propose a solution, but who better than those who are in this every day to help us strengthen the process and correct all of those deficiencies that you see in terms of foreign trade activities? Thank you.
Claudia, why don't you wrap up this panel? Thank you once again for the invitation. It was such an honor to share the panel with the rest of participants. I think everybody has contributed with great ideas. Let's get back to the fact that infrastructure, ESG, safety, these are the main pillars, and they should draw clear line of action that needs to be translated into best practices and better ways to convey to the international community interested in coming to Mexico that Mexico provides certainties, that Mexico has all of the conditions. We have said that in Mexico, of course, we can embrace your investment and be the hotel of manufacturing, to close the session with the phrase coined by the Secretary of the Economy. Thank you very much. I pretty much enjoyed this panel. Thank you. I would like to thank our panelists for joining us. We invite the next panelists to join us up on the stage. We kindly invite our next panelists to join us up on the stage. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, take your seats so we can continue with the rest of today's event.
Ahí anda mi cuñado.
We are ready to start the last conversation of the day, financing for growth and investment incentives. We greet today's participants, Gabriel Yorio González, Undersecretary of Treasury and Public Credit. Luz María de la Mora, Undersecretary of Foreign Trade, is also here with us. Jordi Dacias, Managing Director of CDPQ. Cristiani, Chief of Investment Strategy for Latin America of JP Morgan Private Bank, who is today's moderator. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this morning, this afternoon. This is our first presential forum in a long, long time. So I do hope it's worth the while. Today's topic is key. It is one of the most relevant topics, and it has also caused controversy in Mexico over recent years. And it's not a matter of the 3 last years or the pandemic, but this trend has been going on ever since the 80s. If we go back to the data of several decades, and even more recently in 2015, the all of investment and the potential effects it has had in Mexico. Both public and private investment, as we know, is the key engine that moves economies throughout the world. What is going on in Mexico? Why haven't we not reached to that point? What are we missing out on? And what are the actions that should be implemented from both the public and the private sector so we can actually work together and cooperate in bolstering the country's economic sector? I hope that today we can shed light on the path ahead, the actions to be taken. Thank you to my peers after 3 years meeting over Zoom at home. And I want to also thank the American Society Council of the Americas for giving me the opportunity to moderate this topic, which is pretty dear to my interests. Let me open up with a general question. From your standpoint, how can the public sector and the private sector complement one another when investing in infrastructure without them each pulling towards one side or the other? How can there be an actual commitment to work together? Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for the invitation to this forum. I think it is indeed a relevant forum. And I agree with you. We agree with you. In order to grow, investment is required. Investment goes through different channels. From the Foreign Trade Undersecretariat office I lead, we are working hard to address this topic, and also, as you mentioned, to work on the need for infrastructure, which is also key to boost the economic activity. At our office, it is our responsibility to negotiate, implement, negotiate free trade agreements and the reciprocal addressing of investment. And we do not only deal with openness to investment, but significantly as well, everything regarding market access, services access, and matters regarding dispute resolutions. And dispute resolutions provide certainty to the economic investment activity and to investment. Most recently, we started to use the USMCA dispute mechanisms to address issues in the automotive sector. This is important because the automotive sector is one of the main drivers of economic growth and investment attraction for Mexico. Why did we resort to the dispute resolution mechanism? Because it is contemplated in the treaty. Whenever a certain measure leads to different interpretations, we can resort to using this mechanism, and also because the lack of common understanding between Mexico and Canada vis-a-vis the United States does create uncertainty. And for us, the auto part industry of the automotive sector accounts for 30% of the transportation sector. So using and resorting to such a mechanism will also contribute to add on to certain certainty. And we also have a network of 30 agreements for reciprocal promotion of investment that also provides investors the necessary guarantees to invest in the region. On top of that, at the Ministry of the Economy, as Secretary Clouthier mentioned this morning, we launched the one-stop shop called Investing in Mexico, which is an international platform. At the World Trade Organization, one of the negotiation areas is investment facilitation. And one of that negotiation's conclusions is that countries should have one-stop shops for investment to provide investors with the necessary information in order to invest. And we also are part of the International Trade Facilitation Council. It is part of our agreements made with the WTO, and it is part of UNCA, where a specific chapter is devoted to trade facilitation, which is highly relevant to promote investment and to guarantee that we reduce the bureaucracy, regulations, and unnecessary costs. We're working on that to promote investment within the Secretariat of the Economy. We also have a microsite where files and where requests can be filed or consultations to facilitate trade. Thank you, Undersecretary. Now that I hear you, I sense an appetite for facilitation and follow through, which is great that the public sector will build a partnership with the public sector, as well as a series of incentives in order to encourage facilitation and follow through of the public sector from the private sector. Jordi, from the Ministry of the Treasury, what are the government incentives contemplated to bolster investment? Now that we're speaking of nearshoring, and given the current context, to work on the side of the supply comes in a more timely fashion, and it is better. In recent months, we have discussed this internally, and this conversation has been led by the Secretariat of the Economy to see how we can support companies to facilitate the changeover so they can implement their nearshoring strategies. What is naturally happening is nearshoring in Mexico's natural clusters in the central corridor or up north. However, the government wants to directly incede in company and business relocation in the Isthmus corridor and the Divergent area with 2.3 million inhabitants. 2/3 of that population lives in extreme poverty. So we want to relocate the infrastructure towards the Isthmus so they can establish the basic industrial infrastructure with 10 industrial parks over the corridor. So the first line of action is to provide the basic infrastructure so the businesses can tap into the region, and the society, the partnership of the private sector with the federal government is extremely relevant to sustain the growth. A second major axis of growth involve the type of incentives, and the Ministry of Treasury does not like to do much movement in tax collection, and there's not much room for it, but this area gives us the chance to establish certain tax incentives. You must remember that in order to support the nearshoring strategy, we have a tax package for the northern border. It has already been published, and in the northern border, some companies are naturally seeking for nearshoring to take advantage of the situation. But the president requested that we contemplate an incentive scheme for the Isthmus area. It has not yet been published, but I just would like to give you a glimpse on how we are designing the package. The president wants to create jobs in the area and create permanent impact in the region, to have a fair and equitable development. Over different meetings, we're trying to find out the type of fiscal scheme that will come useful to businesses so they can increase the return rate, their ROI, so they can invest in the isthmus area, and they can also continue to invest constantly in this. So the incentives packs, we're thinking about include the VAT, the income tax, and the Secretary of the Economy also said that we should encourage research. We want to create an incentives package that will increase the ROI so companies can keep up their investment pace in the region and replicate examples seen all over the world. Brazil, for instance, is one of the masters of these types of incentives packages. And just to finish, financing for those companies who need funds for their relocation. We've been working not only with the local development bank, such as Banco Mex or NAFI, as the Secretary mentioned, but multilateral organizations play a significant role as well. And we've been working hand in hand with the Ministry of the Economy to identify strategies alongside the IDB. Last week, we were part of the spring sessions in conversations with the bank officials who will try to create a financing package alongside technical assistance to those companies who want to move to Mexico. So we will gather the development banks, the IDB, or perhaps CAF will also want to get involved. And there's a bank in the northern border with the United States who will assist with funds for infrastructure. So these are the three main supporting accesses so companies can tap into the nearshoring trend. I agree with you, and Mexico cannot miss out on this opportunity. Due to the pandemic and stemmed from the global situation, Mexico's position is positioning himself as itself as a key destination for investment because it can give more than other markets. What you mentioned, Mr. Undersecretary, is a topic that we should bear in mind. LAC, our LAC, is important for R&D. If we measure Mexico against the rest of the OECD countries, Mexico is way below the average. This is information from a report we published many years ago. The GDP percentage of Mexico devoted to R&D is less than 3%, whereas the general OECD average is 4.5%. So we will eventually move from a manufacturing model to a manufacturing model, which is a development of technology, and Mexico should not stay behind. And I would like to talk about this later on. Jordi, paraphrasing what the Undersecretary mentioned about the supply and the demand. The supply of the government comes in terms of facilitation, accompaniment, and incentives. What does the private sector need to walk the path with the government? Let me give you an example. We have global infrastructure investments and with 30 billion, and our objective is to duplicate in 3 to 4 years to double that amount of money. And we do find those opportunities in countries like Mexico due to the immense infrastructure opportunities. So first of all, you need investment programs at the long term, because those are the programs that will strengthen. And if they work at the long term, they will draw the pension funds like ours, and it will allow us to plan at the long term. And those programs, as it has been said, should be stable, should be traceable regarding their framework, which is another very important issue, because the stronger the program is, the more competitive the money you can draw in, and you become more competitive because risks are mitigated, and long-term capital wants safe allocation as a figure of speech. And all of it is part of a collaboration framework with the great drivers of infrastructure over the market, such as government and public expenditure. And there are different mechanisms that can be articulated. They exist in Mexico and elsewhere, ranging from concessions, PPPs. So the tools are there, the table is set, and we have to, let me give you an example, not of Mexico, but let me give you an example of the 4G programs in Colombia. These are amazing highway infrastructure programs, and they've been running for 15 or 20 years under the same regime. And so it provides the stability to the type of capital we bring. It's long-term capital because it's money that we have to give back to our pensionees, to the retiring sector. So these are basic topics, and I should continue now the conversation and segue to ESG, which also involves the long-term vision. These are conversations that are necessary to have, and the demand for the ESG conversation is pretty high among capital investment. Our beneficiaries question the how, the why, what about the social impact? So that group of tools, really simplifying the answer from the private capital perspective, will strongly facilitate the investment. I fully agree. And Mexico does offer amazing investment opportunities and a huge upside. Nonetheless, the long-term planning, certainty, and stability factors are also key. Under Secretary Mora, we just saw what happened with the electric sector reform, and as Jordi mentioned, these legal changes, these changes in the legal framework that are so fast do not necessarily favor the factors just mentioned by Jordi. What is the government doing to actually provide certainty, the projection of stability to the private sector in order to encourage investment? Mexico has it clear. In order to grow, as I already said, investment is required, private, national, and foreign investment. So we need to have an appropriate landscape that nourishes investment. This administration has worked on different areas according to each office's different responsibilities. At the Ministry of the Economy, as I mentioned, we facilitate investment in our department, and we also try to create that environment by setting the rules. In Mexico, Mexico has 14 free trade agreements with 50 countries, and 12 of them include chapters on protection and promotion of investment. There are 3 agreements for reciprocal protection of investments with 31 countries, and we continue to strengthen our treaty network. We're negotiating business agreements with Ecuador. We're also starting negotiations with the UK, with South Korea, and Latin America. We're working already with Brazil and Argentina. We're also working within the Pacific Alliance framework with partners that can become member states, which are Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. This scheme means that Mexico understand that investment promotion agreements and free trade agreements are a way to set the ground rules, where we offer preferred access as well as the possibility of investing in Mexico under certain conditions. The state also has the power is to tweak certain projects according the public policy necessities and priorities. Mexico is among the 10 main foreign investment destinations according to international statistics, investment continues to come. Last year, we closed at around $30 billion, considering that direct foreign investment flows as a result of the pandemic and the global uncertainty have been rethinked, or the investment has slowed down a little bit. But Mexico is a country that is open to investment, and the legal framework is there, which is essential to sustain investment. And we clearly understand that the instruments set out in our free trade agreement and investment agreements are a way of provide certainty to investors so they can continue coming to Mexico, because Mexico possesses different factors that convey throughout the morning of why we are an attractive sector and we remain to be an attractive sector for investment. Most definitely. Undersecretary Yorio, let's go back to financing based upon the needs of the private sector. You talked about the active role played by the local development banks and multilateral organizations, but historically, Mexico has a low percentage of credit as percentage of the GDP. Several factors have led and encouraged the situation, but into the future, how can we change the dynamics, and how can businesses feel at ease and comfortable of using the different financing schemes at their reach? Public banking, multilateral banking, private banking, and even the public market. Absolutely. This question comes at the right time, because banks are funding us, but we should also take advantage of our own market development, and that's where the first challenge lies. If you allow me very quickly to provide you with the context, 3 years ago, when we started to analyze the challenges to grow in Mexico, or for Mexican growth, and Rodrigo, the Minister of the Treasury, talked about this, the lack of deeper and financial market that will allow the SMEs to have a certain financing instrument, whether it's a loan or money access and capital carpets. But today you can take on a loan, for instance, in the banking sector of mature markets. But there's one market that we have not yet addressed as directly, and it is one of the major challenges ahead, as Yorio mentioned, private capital. Private capital has been in Mexico, has been funding projects in Mexico for a while now, and the time has come that from the regulator's perspective, we should have a broader regulatory landscape so we can take advantage of the private credit market to develop an additional market to provide further access to businesses, to mobilize the resources within our economy to specific projects such as those that we're talking about today, nearshoring. So first, we need to build a reform agenda with the financial sector to restructure private capital. And just to conclude with the role of my undersecretariat, balance control involves maintaining macro fiscal stability, as well as the variables and the pillars of the economy to contribute to market development and to the private sector decision-making process. And the reforms conducted a few years ago in the stock market to actually encourage access of investors to hopefully eventually be able to deepen that penetration will be key, because at the end of the day, private capital funds in Mexico or wherever they go will add on a yield to their stakeholders due to their operations, inward or outward operations. So in Mexico, unlike what we saw in Brazil last year, it was a recovery year. The pandemic was there, but the public market was super dynamic with capital, private funds working on the exit. But it has not happened in Mexico. Jordi, from your perspective, what are the main hurdles for this to happen, and what does CPQ think about the end objective you have contemplated to invest in this country?
In Mexico, we have approximately 6 billion Canadian dollars invested in different fields, mainly governmental bonds. We have infrastructure. We have something that we call private capital plus companies in the pharmaceutical sectors, in the health sector, etc. And as Gabriel was saying, as you said, one of the differences with other markets is the rotation of the capital market. We have many advantages because we have a lot of flexibility. We don't have many obligations, or the situation is not too demanding for us. However, for example, there are incentives, or if we need to compare the fiscal situation with other countries, that could be very interesting to trigger this part more towards the private field. And that is obviously a circle. At the end, you're gonna have more access to the market, and that's the circle that we all want to participate in through investments, which is the area that you want to foster, right? So I think that these are the action frameworks. I think in the last 10 years, we have seen significant progress. I think there's it's notable in Mexico, and there are many pathways that we can follow, and we can foster this virtuous cycle on the market side. That would be a very important side for us, definitely, because on top of everything, I think that you have an audience, let's say, with the demographic pyramid that we have in the country. You have a possibility for growth and expansion in capital markets in the private sector that is quite important, and so we must take advantage of that. You were mentioning some sectors where you are present. Deputy Secretary, what are the sectors where you see more dynamism in the country? Without a doubt, Mexico is attractive in terms of investment, not only for manufacturing, but only in the service industry, in its different areas, and in agriculture. Food security, the need for food supplies, food services around the globe, that puts Mexico in a privileged position. Mexico has an economic complexity that a few countries have. We have an infrastructure that is not only productive, given the history of the automotive industry in Mexico that led to the opening of other industries, such as the aerospace industry, pharmaceutical, chemical industries, medication industry, that have led to other developments. But Mexico is also an ideal area for investments, especially when it comes to the point of this conversation in terms of supply chains. Mexico is ideally positioned to keep being a key partner for production in North America. Today, I can assure you that any corporation, any company that might be considering doing business in the United States considers Mexico in their investment plans, because Mexico is a competitiveness factor. And today, with the inflation numbers that we're seeing, the supply situations, Mexico has become key. So there are many reasons for which several sectors in traditional manufacturing, such as automotive, car parts, chemical, electronics, etc., are current, but also new developments, new sectors. An example, digital commerce, e-commerce, which is a mixture of digital platform facilitation with manufacturing and production. So there we see a convergence in the sense that Mexico has a platform for manufacturing that can be adapted to different productive processes. And on the other hand, we also have this entire experience that not all countries have in terms of the entrepreneurial fabric, let's say. The entrepreneur sector is top-notch. They know how to do business. They are fearless. And finally, also being in Mexico, not only in terms of manufacturing, but also services and new areas, provides us with significant return of investment. The fact is that return of investment in Mexico is better by several percentage points than some countries, even in the Asian Southeast. I agree. I think that the Mexican market has been an oven for investment that has generated wealth impressively. But what Yorio was mentioning during his intervention was that today investors and stakeholders look for part of that investment that they are also receiving can be generated not necessarily through monopoly practices, because let's recognize this, Mexico, historically speaking, has been an economy with monopoly practices that I believe in part accompanies the advantageous position that Mexico has, and that has helped our yields. But now there is a very significant approach in terms of socially responsible practices. And I think that this is a very important factor for Mexico to go along with this global trend in terms of truly how to position ourselves as a market with comparative advantages, with a network of broad free trade agreements, key positioning with entrepreneurial experience and technological development, but also being aware of practices in terms of being socially responsible. What is the government doing to this regard so that we can truly present ourselves this way to the private sector, to the entrepreneurial sector? And I would also like to hear from the private sector, what are you seeing in Mexico responding to these concerns that you might have? If you allow me, I would like to make a very specific comment that I made this morning. The labor reform promoted by President López Obrador, without a doubt, is a structural reform. It's a reform that is being implemented currently, and it is having it is making significant changes in terms of labor justice, union freedom, which will translate into better jobs, workers who are better prepared and work under better conditions, and a better work environment in general. I completely agree. If you allow me, I'd like to reflect on this as well. A few years ago, we were talking a lot about climate change and the environment, and that's an agenda that I think has been present for the last 30 years. And I think all countries have tried to identify different kinds of solutions that go from the energy sector all the way to diversity and economies, etc. But in the last few years, I believe that social criteria that have been mentioned have become more relevant. We are talking about that, but also investors are demanding this situation, and there's something that has to do with growth as well. So I think that we have been building on this along the way. I don't know what the next phase is. Maybe it's digitization, but we're building on that. And I think that at this point, this has led us to seeing countries like Mexico who are facing climate change, but also social gaps. We need to face broad sustainability concepts where we address these different dimensions, because they're all tied to climate change. The people most affected will probably be the most vulnerable families or those with the lowest incomes. And I think that this was was one of the first definitions that we adopted, that we needed to incorporate the social dimension. And at the Treasury Department, we opted for the use of sustainable actions incorporated into the economy, not only in terms of the use of public but also private resources. And we have been working on the development of a sustainable debt market with sustainable financing. You have seen that we have already emitted some instruments that are sustainable, but we need to finish developing the taxonomy of the system that will provide us with a financing channeling mechanism in terms of projects that will be much more helpful. What we're looking for, we're also going to be doing with the financial sector. We're going to identify the taxonomy that will allow us to provide our sector with further security and channel resources. And just to wrap up, if we think about the context that we're living in, we have seen supply shocks, COVID, the Russia-Ukraine war, we have inflation, etc. In a way, the world will have to look for a new type of economic balance because, like we said, we're at an inflection point. And this new economic balance, what it could lead to might be sustainable investments because we're going to need more, they're going to need more infrastructure, that we're going to need to incorporate human talent into the equation and bridge these gaps. The Isthmus corridor is the best example, I believe. That's where we don't necessarily have investment, but we see a flow of foreign direct investment in the region. If we add to that package an approach of ASG or sustainable finances, we believe that the region could double or triple in terms of investments, depending on the type of strategy that we might decide to apply to the different industrial corridors that are being developed. I love hearing this because definitely we have given a priority to sustainable topics, and Mexico specifically has to address the social gap. The gap that we need to address is gigantic. I believe that 90% of Mexico's wealth is in the hands of 10% of the population. So you have a human capital that in many other fora would be fought over. So hopefully these public policies might lead to a financial interest of private investors, and they can be accompanied in a way that all of this can occur. We can promote development, close the social gap, the investments can be sustainable, but at the same time, profitable. So from your perspective, Jordi, what are the criteria that your own stakeholders are emphasizing on, and how do you justify with that your investments in Mexico? The truth is that we have been at this for 30 years. This is a constant evolution of the definition. And somebody gave a definition the other day, and somebody else corrected them, saying, no, now it's this. Now, when it comes to funds and pensions, we have very long-term goals. It's not about options. It's somewhere where we need to be, and becoming pioneers is going to foster many opportunities to investors and countries as well. And that's why our bet is quite clear. And it's not only our bet, it's what's going on around the world. The numbers that I have is that there are sustainable investments made for $50 billion. And this year already we're at 20 billion. So I wanted to say also that everyone seems to be in agreement here. The private sector, governments, multilateral fora, there is a common global vision towards that goal. Now, equality is crucial here. It's not about going through the different phases or different areas. Everything is linked. Everything is tied. And I'm talking about internal equality, geographical, global equality, all kinds of equality that is becoming a part of the conversation. And the concept of sustainability is what helps us bring everything together. In Mexico, the perception that we have is that we're moving forward on this quite fast. We are seeing constant innovation, but companies and local funds as well. These concepts are evolving very quickly, and our concept of ESG goes from climate to everything else, anything that has to do with equity, inclusion, etc. So it's a very broad concept that is an umbrella on top of our investments. In Mexico, like I said, we have many millions invested, and there must be something that's going on here that fosters our maintaining our investments here. So whether it's today or tomorrow morning, I think that sustainability is what we need to address all around. And for the first time, we can see this concept as something that is unstoppable. And in terms of capital funds and all of these different instruments, they're all converging on this point. I agree. In spite of the fact that Mexico by far is the second public market, is the second smallest public market in the region, because Brazil is ranked first. Even if we go through the list classifying the publicly listed Mexican companies among Latin American companies, Mexico is in 5 or 6 spaces in the top 10 when we categorize them by ESG practices. It is incredible the speed at which this has been happening. So that in terms of all of our public policies, hopefully at least we'll be able to take advantage at least of the social part without focusing on a specific chapter. We are just in time to wrap up. Thank you everyone for being present at this last panel. Hopefully it was as interesting for you as it was for me. I leave with 3 messages. The public sector is accompanying these actions. They seek to facilitate private investments. On the financial part, there are incentives to develop new areas of investment in the country, which is crucial in terms of not putting all of our eggs in one basket. And 3, there is appetite in the private sector because Mexico is a paradise of investment for yield generation. And what we truly need is to define the certainty, the long-term vision, and the stability in terms of public policies so as to do both things in terms of public and private investment at the same time. Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists for their participation. Thank you to the Department of Treasury, the American Society Council of the Americas, and all of you for joining us. With this, we conclude this event. We wish you all a wonderful day.